My name is Ron Flavin, and thank you for having me here today. I'm really happy to be here. Like Jeff said, I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, almost my entire adult life. And I've been in the retail business, I've been in the manufacturing business, consumer goods, international business. I've been in a lot of different industries. And along the way, what I realized is what I enjoy most out of all the things that I've done is helping organizations and companies to grow, to get to where they want to be, wherever that is. And my expertise is developing strategies to get from point A to point B, and then connecting organizations and businesses with the resources to get there. Usually that involves financing. My particular area of expertise is government funding. Government grants and contracts, most specifically government grants. And you notice that I do not have any dollar signs on my suit jacket, so I won't tell you any lies and I won't make any false promises about free government money. So, having said that, I will get started. Like I say, there are people who would have you believe that there's this huge free pot of government grant money available for somebody who wants to start a business, expand a business, pay off debts, or whatever the case may be. And that's not true. The federal government does give out more than $500 billion in grants every year, and of that, about $26 billion is awarded to for-profit firms. But none of that money, $0, is ever given to start a business or to pay off debt. The federal government gives grant money out to for-profit firms that are aligned to the government's national interests, funding priorities. So it's just not this free pot of money. So there are 21 different government agencies, federal agencies that award grants. There's $26 billion, 21 different categories of federal grants. The other avenue for companies to access federal dollars is through contracts. There are millions of contracts awarded every year in billions and billions and billions of dollars. Today, I really want to focus on the grants. I'm going to touch on the contracts a little bit, but mostly focus on the grants because the contracting side is really an area all unto itself. Grants, different from loans in that you don't have to pay grant money back. When a government agency or a foundation awards you a grant, that's your money to use for whatever purpose you've specified in your funding proposal. The advantage that has in contrast to, say, angel investors or venture capital is that you don't have to give up equity. So if you are able to attain a federal grant or a state grant, that money doesn't take away any of your equity in your company. Grant awards can range anywhere from just a few $1,000s up to multi-million dollars. I've gotten grant awards of more than $9 million a number of different times. So they can vary from any size. Most grant awards are around the $500,000 range. Grant money is not always free. Much like if you're buying a piece of real estate, the bank expects you to put in some of your own money. A lot of times with grant funds, in fact, most of the time with grants that are awarded to for-profit businesses, you're required to put up a certain percentage of the funds yourself. That could range from anywhere from as little as 5% up to a dollar for dollar match. So if it's a dollar for dollar match, if you're awarded a grant of $1 million, that means you have to come up with $1 million on your own. But generally, it runs anywhere from 5% up to 20-25% is a typical matching funds. I already talked about that, so these are some of the national interests that are priorities for the federal government. Anything that's national security, public safety, healthcare technologies. In particular, when you're talking about healthcare, they're interested in technologies and processes that increase access to healthcare, that reduce costs, that increase efficiency, increase effectiveness. Those are projects that are of interest to the federal government. Education, college and career readiness, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, technologies, processes, and services that support that priority are of interest to the government. Energy savings, renewable energy, energy efficiency, that is a very strong interest for the government. Telecommunications and telecommunications technologies, broadband. I've worked a lot with a number of different broadband projects all over the country. Any type of technological innovation that is kind of a great leap forward, that is a game-changing technology, the government is generally interested in those types of projects. There's two ways that for-profit firms can access federal grants. One is the $26 billion that I mentioned. Those are grants that are awarded directly to for-profit firms. The government issues a request for proposals, and in the eligibility, it'll say that it's open to small businesses or for-profit businesses. So a business applies for that funding, is awarded, and the funds flow directly to the firm. But there's another way. I work with Motorola, I work with Cisco, I work with a lot of different large multinational corporations that access federal grants through a different avenue. And Cisco, I'll use that as an example. They do telecommunications technologies. A lot of their technologies are of interest to public safety organizations, law enforcement, firefighters, educational institutions. So what they do is they scan the federal grant opportunities, and when they see a federal grant program that is only available to public safety, educational institutions, municipalities, whatever the case may be, but it supports, the priority of the project supports telecommunications, increased public safety, they go to send out to their potential client list of municipalities and public safety agencies and say, hey, there's this grant opportunity available. You can get $1 million for your police department to buy new interoperable telecommunications technologies. We know a grant writer who can get you the money. All you need to do is buy a certain percentage of your equipment from Cisco. So I work directly with the municipality or the law enforcement agency, write the grant, they secure it, they get the funds, they purchase a certain portion of their grant money goes towards Cisco Technologies, and the remainder goes to whatever it is else that they need, turnout gear or uniforms or whatever the case may be. So that's another way that for-profit firms are able to access government grants. Now that has to be done within the confines of government regulations so that it's above the board and there's no backdoor dealings going on, but that's all very doable. So the key elements in that are in working with a Cisco or a Motorola or another company that is not able to access the funds directly for a certain opportunity, is that they have to establish a relationship with municipalities, educational institutions, whatever the case may be. And then they have to look at the request for proposals to make sure that everything that they do is above the board and is ethical and is in compliance with the grant guidelines. Because you don't want anything like that to come back and make the news, and that's bad. So you have to, everything has to follow the federal procurement guidelines. Next. These are some of the different types of grants that are available to for-profit firms. We've got the Small Business Innovation Research. We've got the Small Business Technology Transfer, Department of Energy, National Institutes of Health. All of these grant programs support research, development, and commercialization of innovative technologies. grant size awards can be 1.5 million, 500,000, 10 million, it really varies. National Institutes of Health grants are generally around $1.5 million maximum, but there are certain exceptions and they can be higher. If you're looking at a national NIH grant, you typically need to partner with a research institution because those are very heavily focused research grants. But I've worked with a number of companies that have been successful in working with the NIH and partnering with a university like Clemson or something similar that's a research institution. Next. If your technology can support military operations, and there are a wide variety of ways that different technologies can support military options, the Department of Defense through DARPA has a number of different grant funding programs. They're particularly interested in very game-changing technologies. They have what's called broad agency announcements, and those are very broad. And they're open to new ideas with these. When they issue these BAAs, it's because they're looking for something new. They don't necessarily have anything particular in mind. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll have a list of priorities or general areas that are of interest to them, but there are a number of really good opportunities in grant opportunities with the Department of Defense. Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, Department of Education, all of the 26 different federal agencies that award grants offer some opportunities for-profit firms. These are some of the grants that I've worked with in for-profit firms. I mentioned the $9.3 million. This was for a startup technology company based in California in the Bay Area. And they were at the startup phase where they were not even able to quit their jobs. They were attorneys, they were engineers, and they all had regular day jobs. But what they did is they had a validated concept for an innovative data server that uses just 10% of the electricity of a typical data server and takes up 25% of the space. Data servers are huge gobblers of electricity around the globe. So they knew this, they had talked to potential customers, Google, Yahoo, and whatnot, and there was interest from these technology companies in their data server technology. So we were able to go to the Department of Energy, and they were awarded a $9.3 million grant to develop a prototype and actually begin testing the data server. And they're now well on their way to commercializing the product. I also worked with another group in Southern California where they were also another startup where they still had their day jobs, and they had taken they had developed a pyrolysis machine, which is it converts biomass into energy. Pyrolysis is nothing new. The technology has been around for over 100 years. But a typical pyrolysis machine is huge. It's giant, and it costs millions and millions of dollars. But what they had done is they had scaled down the technology and come up with a biomass machine, a pyrolysis machine that could be hooked onto the back of a pickup truck, meaning that farmers could put it on the back of their truck and they could drive it out onto the field and take it to the source of the biomass. In this particular case, it was poultry litter, which is chicken poo, if you don't know what that is. So they were able to drive this around these massive poultry farms and convert poultry litter into syngas and biochar, which is a natural fertilizer, and wood vinegar. So again, that was a startup where they still had their day jobs. We worked with the US Department of Agriculture, and we got them a $1 million grant to build 2 machines and test them in Wharton, Texas at the world's largest egg farm. So that was another example. I've worked with several groups up in the Northwest to deploy broadband networks in rural areas. There we did, those were established telecommunications companies, and I got them $1.5 million, and we actually just got another $6.7 million to deploy a broadband network in rural Humboldt County in Northern California. Another good example is this is a telecommunications company that I worked with. I think it was Motorola. We got them $7 million to deploy an interoperable radio network in the state of North Carolina to improve their public safety and ensure that the police officers in one jurisdiction could communicate with the firefighters in another jurisdiction during an emergency situation. Because prior to that, everybody was using a different technology and they couldn't communicate with one another. So we got them $7 million to build out this network, and Motorola was the recipient of the grant funds. I mean, was the ultimate recipient, the subcontractor. Just, I want to touch on contracting opportunities. There's two different ways for companies to access federal contracts. One is through the General Services Administration contracts. It's a cumbersome process, but if you are awarded a GSA contract, it puts you kind of in a government purchasing catalog, an electronic catalog. So government buyers from different agencies can find your products and they can buy them. It's great, but the downside of it is that the orders tend to be very small. They have they like to have very low minimums. So you might get a $1,000 order, a $500 order, a $100 order, whatever. And not that it can be a good avenue, but you have to expect that your orders are going to be lots of small ones rather than large ones. The other way to do it is to obtain a federal contract through a request for proposals or a request for quotes. Those contracts tend to be much larger. They could be $50,000, $100,000, it could be tens of millions. The Department of Defense is investing $7.1 billion in retrofitting military bases with renewable energy technologies, energy efficient lighting. So some of these contracts can be massive, but they require a lot of work. And like I say, contracting is an avenue unto itself, and I'm very experienced on it, but I really want to today focus on the grants. These are some of the other different areas that I've, technology, small business innovation research, Department of Energy, USDA, if you're in the telecommunications field, you can access grants through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, through the National Science Foundation, through the U.S. Department of Justice. So you can see that there's a lot of different agencies that cover technology and different areas. And if anybody wants to email me afterwards, I'm happy to send you this presentation so that you can, because there's a lot of information there for me, and I don't want to waste time and just go through all of that. If you develop technology, if you have an educational technology, Department of Energy, or Department of Education, Department of Labor, Small Business Innovation Research, Small Business Technology Transfer, there's a number of different programs if you are involved in education technology or educational services. This is an overview of how to find government grants. You can see that there's a lot of different, well, the federal government is obviously is huge, and with the 26 different agencies, it used to be very difficult to uncover the grant opportunities. So what they did is they created grants.gov, and grants.gov is a central database where all federal grant opportunities and cooperative agreements opportunities are listed. And a cooperative agreement is essentially a grant. The difference is minimal. So everything is in grants.gov, and up until last year, the grants.gov user interface was horribly unfriendly. But now, since I think it was last July, they completely revamped the grants.gov user interface. And now it is very friendly. You can search by agency, you can search by category, say if you were interested in technology or whatever, you can search by category, you can search by eligibility. So if you want to search for only grant opportunities that are open to small businesses, you can click on that link and you can check the box eligibility small businesses, and it'll only return those grant opportunities that are open to small businesses. So they've really improved the usability factor with grants.gov. And one thing I want to point out about that is all of the information about federal grants and even state grants is available online, and it's for free. All of it. There are no insider guides or insider lists of secret government grants. They don't exist. Everything is available online for free, and all you need is grants.gov to find all of the federal grants. Unfortunately, there is no central database of state grant opportunities. So those you need to search for if you're, you can look for South Carolina, but if you do business in 25 different states, then you need to do, unfortunately, you need to do 25 different searches because there is no standard data or central database for state grant opportunities. If you're looking for federal contracting opportunities, all of the government contract opportunities are posted in fedbizops.gov, and that is a central database where all opportunities are posted. It's the search feature is a little cumbersome. If you just search for technology, you might get 1,700 results. So you need to use the advanced search feature so that you can narrow it down. But every federal contracting opportunity you might want to find is available on fedbizops.gov. There's a couple of tools that I use that I think you might find helpful. If you want to find out what your competitors are, if your competitors are receiving federal dollars, you can go to usaspending.gov, and it is a database that contains every dollar of government contracting money that is spent. So if you're looking to see if your competitor, I worked with a correctional management company, and they're in competition with, I think it's Correctional Solutions of America or something like that, based out of Tennessee. So you go to, all I did is I went to usaspending.gov, went through the search function, pulled up every contract that's ever been awarded to that company so that they could see exactly what they were up against, what kind of contracts they were obtaining, the dollar value, the length of the contract. So the usaspending.gov is an incredibly valuable search tool if you're looking for information about where the government is spending its contract dollars, and if you're looking for information about whether or not your competitors are accessing federal contracting opportunities. The link at the bottom is to forecasts. That's another really useful tool that I use a lot in the government contracting side of my business. You can go there and you can look at the different federal agencies, and they will have forecasts of what they expect the contracting opportunities they anticipate opening up in the coming year. So you can look at the Department of Defense, the Department of Education, any of the agencies, and you can get a sense of what they might be looking for over the next 12 months. Some of the granting agencies do that as well, but it's very inconsistent. Department of Education issues grants forecasts, and I think maybe one or two more, but it's very inconsistent on the grant side. But on the contract side, most all of the agencies participate, and that's a very useful tool. One of the things that, when Jeff introduced me, he mentioned that I brought in $146 million for my clients in grants. And not to boast, but a typical person who does what I do might say, I've raised $5 or $10 million over the last 10 years. And I've brought in 146 million. One of the reasons that I do what I do so well is I also work for the federal government as a proposal reviewer. And now, I've never reviewed my own proposals or anything of the sort, I would love to say, but I do that for the experience, and I work for the Department of Energy, Department of Education, U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Treasury, a number of different agencies that award grants and contracts to for-profit firms. So throughout the year, I work as a professional reviewer for these firms, or for these agencies, so I know exactly the kinds of projects that the government is funding, what they look for when they review these proposals and score them, and decide who's going to get funded and who's not. So that's one of the reasons that I am so successful in doing what I do, is because I have that insider's knowledge of what's going on in the funding landscape. And I've also worked with non-governmental agencies as well to review their funding proposals for the private sector. So a typical grant proposal, funding proposal, includes different elements. The need for the project, organizational background, history, mission, a description of the problem that the technology or the process can solve. One of the things, I was talking to Phil about this last week or the week before, that I see where for-profit firms go wrong when they develop their grant proposals is they are so focused on their technology or their process that's where they keep all of their efforts and their focus on that part of the proposal, and they fail to look at the other elements that are necessary to make a well-rounded fundable proposal. And a big part of that is the capacity of the team. When I look at any type of grant funding, I look at that as a venture capitalist or an angel investor. The government is only going to support projects that are going to be successful. A venture capitalist doesn't want to invest in a company that isn't going to be around in 5 years. Neither does the government. So when you develop these grant proposals, it's extremely important to focus on the capacity of the team who's going to be carrying out the project activities. So you need to talk about their experience, their qualifications, why these are the right people to make sure that this project is a success. So it's not just about the technology and all the great things it can do. You have to have all of those other elements in place, just like if you were going to an angel investor or a venture capitalist or even a bank for a loan. They want to know about their commercialization plan. Okay, so once you develop this technology or test it or build a prototype, how are you going to bring it to the market? What steps are you going to take? How long is it going to take? Who are your customers? How do you know that your customers are going to buy it? How did you validate your customer model? How did you validate your marketplace? What resources do you need to get from here to there? So it's a very complex proposal. A lot of information needs to be packed in there. And like I say, I look at it as if you need to look at it as if you are preparing a proposal for a venture capitalist or an angel investor or a bank loan, because it needs to be a well-rounded proposal that includes all of the elements, not just the technology. Another area of importance when you're developing the proposals is how are you going to measure your success? How do you know if you are achieving everything that you set out that you're going to achieve when you develop that proposal? That's, when I review proposals, that's a key area where I see many small businesses failing, is they don't put in milestones so they can mark their success. How are they going to know that their project is on track, on time, hitting the milestones that they want to hit? So all funding proposals need to have measurable objectives, which the government likes to see SMART. They're called SMART objectives, which is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time specific. So when you talk about these objectives, you need to, by this date, we will have achieved this. By this date, we will have produced X number of prototypes and will have achieved this scale, whatever the case may be. So objectives need to be measurable and they need to be part of the proposal. When grant reviewers review, yes, okay. When grant reviewers review the proposals, they score each section of the proposal, and they have review criteria that they have on one hand, and then they have your proposal on the other hand. So when those proposals are reviewed, they're typically reviewed by teams of persons of 3 to 5 people. And they'll review 5, 10, 15 different proposals and score them independently. And then what they do is they get together and compare notes. And the proposals that universally achieve the highest scores are the ones that are recommended for funding. And that's what I do as a proposal reviewer. So each section carries a certain weight and is worth a certain number of points. So when we look at that, we have to go through and make sure that all of those elements that are in the review criteria are properly addressed in the proposal. And then we give it scores, and then we discuss the scores and either recommend it for funding or don't recommend it for funding. And I have to say that in my experience, and this is not just my experience, but I've talked with a lot of other reviewers and a lot of different funding agencies, on average, only about 3 to 8% of all proposals, funding proposals that are submitted, are going to get awarded funding. Generally, it's close to 5%. So 95% of all grant proposals that are submitted are rejected. And there's a lot of different reasons for it, but the number one reason that they get rejected is because they didn't follow the directions laid out in the request for proposals. More than half of the grant proposals that I review get rejected because they didn't follow the directions. They didn't answer all the questions, they didn't include all the attachments, they didn't include the financial statements, they didn't include the commercialization plan, or whatever the case may be, but somewhere along the line they failed to follow the instructions. And that's why they don't get funded. And that's why somebody like me does what I do, because I know, I'm familiar with the process and I know exactly what needs to be included, so that I've never had a proposal rejected because I didn't follow the instructions. So that basically covers everything that I wanted to touch on today. I think I've got to turn it back over to Phil here. Okay. Yeah, I would like to answer a couple of questions if anybody has any.
Speak to any differences between profit and nonprofit. Are there any significant differences?
If you're a nonprofit, there are a lot more grant opportunities open to you. I've worked with a lot of for-profit firms that have partnered with a nonprofit or even started a nonprofit arm so that they were able to access grants that aren't open to for-profit applicants.
The process is ultimately the same. The packaging needs to be roughly the same.
Exactly. Yeah, the packaging is identical, whether it's for a for-profit firm, a government, or a nonprofit. The process is the same and the packaging is the same.
How long does it take from initial submittal of your plan to the average time to know whether or not you're going to be awarded?
It can be as little as 60 days and up to 6 months. On average, I'd probably say 90 days, typical. But there are, sometimes you'll know before then, but it'll take that long for the process to go through the bureaucracy. So you might find out in 45 days, but then have to wait another 45 days for everything the contracts to be signed and sent back and get in the system and on and on and on.
Do you know if the Council of Governments, a not-for-profit, could work with the Council of Governments? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, would the Council of Governments be eligible for grants?
Right.
Yeah, they would
You
be.
didn't mention them in your slide.
No, but they would be because they're either a nonprofit or they would be considered a governmental entity. So in both cases, they would be eligible to apply for grants.
This area, the Appalachian Council of Governments would be the contact area group, the Greenville, Spartanburg, Anderson area.
Yeah, they would be eligible. Sir?
Do you have to review any intellectual capital, and if you do, is it protected in any way?
When I work with my clients, I always recommend that they keep as much proprietary information as possible out of the proposal. There are protections in place, but personally, I don't trust the government. I know, call me strange, but so I always recommend to my clients that they keep as much or include as little proprietary information as possible, and almost always that's possible. You can talk about the outcome without having to go into detail about the specific process. Now, if you're talking a medical nanotechnology, it might be a little bit different, but for the most part, in most cases, you can leave most of that proprietary information out.
As a follow-up, is that intellectual capital worth anything trading off of the government might expect you to invest?
It really depends on the program. Yeah, it really depends because they're all different. Yes,
You can see the announced recipients of the grants, but can you see their actual proposals, which are a little more detailed, and say these are ones, something you would know about, you know, but somebody as a layperson will say, let me see what they did.
There's the Freedom of Information Act that they have to make all of those proposals available because it's public information. You can contact any, and that goes directly back to what I was saying about the proprietary information. There are supposed to be protections in place where that would be blocked out, but if somebody forgot to do his job, it would be out there. So you could contact the Department of Energy or a program officer, and by law you can file a Freedom of Information request, and they have to provide it to you. But the only caveat I would say is it doesn't necessarily have to be fast. It can take a while, but they are available and you can get them. Some of them are actually, you know, quite happy to give them to you, but other ones will drag their feet.
Last question.
Okay, sir.
When they do the review process, do they give you any feedback why it was rejected or maybe?
Some of them do and some of them don't. About half of them will send you notes back saying, this is what we liked, this is what we didn't like. Always, as a reviewer, every proposal that I review, I always provide a strength and a weakness. You could strengthen this proposal by whatever. So more reviewers are like me than not, so those suggestions and feedback are generally available. Okay, Phil says I'm out of time, so I want to thank you for listening to me. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Hey, Ron, before you wrap up, I get to ask the last question sometimes, and I think that there's probably a lot of folks who'd like to ask you questions, but I'm kind of curious from your perspective. You talked about some of the things that you saw that were hot, that were coming up. Is there anything in your perspective that you look at and you think, man, here's some untapped stuff? I mean, here's some places where, you know, particularly in tech, the government's trying to get something done. They've allocated resources, but there just aren't enough people going after it with the right stuff.
Surprisingly, well, I mean, renewable energy is always. Telecommunications is a very hot topic with the government. Healthcare, reducing healthcare costs, very, very strong focus. College and career readiness, any technologies or processes or services that improve the college and career readiness of students. The U.S. Department of Agriculture actually came out very nicely in the Farm Bill. So they have a lot of money, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture supports a lot of different things, not just agriculture. They actually invested a lot of renewable energy technologies and different types of technologies that don't necessarily come to mind as being ag-related. But USDA has a lot of money.
Awesome. Ron Flavin, ladies and gentlemen. Round of applause.
Thank you.